By the end of this lesson, you should be able to add integers. But before we begin with that, there's some vocabulary and some questions we need to answer. And the first is, what are integers? Integers are whole numbers and their opposites. So what exactly does that mean? So to answer that question, we can look at our number line here. And if you look, everything to the right on our number line is a positive number. And everything to the left of our number line is a negative number. When we take a look at, let's say, positive 5, we look at the distance we went to get to positive 5. We move to the right 5 spots. So now we're going to do just the opposite. We're going to move to the left 5 spots, and that puts us at negative 5. So the opposite of 5 is negative 5. And we can do the same thing. We can work backwards. We can say we went to the left, negative 5. What is the opposite of moving to the left? Negative 5. Moving to the right, positive 5. So 5 is the opposite of negative 5. Negative 5 is the opposite of 5. The next term we need to learn is absolute value. What absolute value means, it is the absolute value of a number. It's a number in its greatest form. So if I take a look here, I have the symbols for absolute value are the two lines on the outside here. And if you look, I have negative 2. So the way you say this is the absolute value of negative 2. And so in doing that, I want to know what it equals. Well, negative is not the greatest value 2 can have. Positive 2 is the greatest value 2 can have. So when we look at this, the absolute value of negative 2 is going to be 2. Likewise, if we say, what is the absolute value of 3? It works the same way. The absolute value is the positive form of this number. 3 is already positive, so we just write 3 again. Absolute value is the positive value of the number asked. The number one thing that students do is they confuse opposites and absolute value. You need to make sure that when it's opposite, you're looking for the opposite answer. The opposite of negative 5 is 5. The opposite of positive 5 is negative 5. But when we're looking at absolute value, we need to make sure that we understand that it means it wants the positive value of the number. So the absolute value of negative 5 will be 5, and the absolute value of positive 5 is 5. Very important to recognize and practice opposites and absolute value. It's very important to realize the opposite means it wants the opposite form of the number. Absolute value wants the positive form of the number. When we're adding integers together, there's two possible movements. We have a positive movement that moves to the right, and we have a negative movement that moves to the left. The positive movement here we can represent as plus 4. The line is moving from 0 to a positive 4. This red arrow is making a negative movement to negative 5, so we can represent that as a negative 5. Now we're going to talk about how we combine these numbers with addition to solve problems of integers. In this problem I have 3 plus a negative 4. I show 3 plus by starting at 0 and moving 3 down my line. Blue arrow representing that positive movement. Next, I'm going to put in an arrow showing negative 4. So this red arrow is going to represent negative 4. And I'm going to start at the positive 3, and now I'm going to move backwards 4. And if you see, it lands at negative 1. So my answer for this problem, 3 plus a negative 4 equals negative 1. In this problem, I'm going to take negative 2 and add it to negative 3. Because I'm starting with negative 2, I'm going to have to use my red arrow moving backwards along my number line. So I put in the red arrow showing negative 2. Now I'm going to add a negative 3 more to that. So here's my arrow for my negative 3, and I'm going to put it right where the negative 2 ended, and I'm going to see negative 3 here. So I get an answer now of negative 5. In this problem, I'm starting with negative 6, and then I'm going to add 8 to that. So the way I show this negative 6 is starting at 0, I move backwards until I end up at negative 6. Now I place this blue arrow here to represent positive 8, moving in the direction right along the number line. So I'm going to go ahead and put it where negative 6 is for my beginning, part of my problem. I'm going to see I end up at positive 2. So negative 6 plus 8 equals 2. In this problem we have 2 plus 4. Very common, but for whatever reason students make mistakes with this when we're working with integers. If we have 2, it means we move to the right 2 places, and then from there it says plus 4, so we're going to move it 4 more. So this blue arrow representing my positive 4, I put it right at the beginning of 2, and it takes me to the answer of positive 6. Okay, I'm going to give you some strategies to use when working with integers so you don't always have to draw out a number line. The first thing, remember, we are adding our integers. The next thing I want you to do is I want you to look and see what do you have. Do you have positive, negative numbers, and then I want you to think absolute value. And so when we have a positive number like the 3 here and a negative number like the negative 6, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use subtraction. So I'm going to subtract the two numbers from each other. And when I do that, I'm going to get 3. Now, the question is it a positive 3 or a negative 3? What I do is I look for the absolute value of both the numbers. Is 6 or does 3 have the largest absolute value? 6 does. So when I look at 6, I want to see what sign 6 has. 6 has a negative sign, so therefore my answer is a negative answer. Again, here in example 2. We have 7 plus a negative 5. So I have opposites. I have a positive and a negative together. I'm going to subtract my two numbers. 7 minus 5 is 2. And then I'm going to look and I'm going to say, is 7 absolute value or is 5 absolute value larger? In this case, 7's absolute value is larger. It's a positive number, so my answer is positive. In my next example, I have negative 5 plus negative 5. Whenever I have the same term, meaning negative and negative, I'm going to go ahead and add those together. Negative, or 5 plus 5 is 10, and because both signs are negative, my answer is a negative 10. And then my last problem, whenever I'm adding two positive numbers, 10 plus 2 gives me 12. They're positive, my answer is positive. So this is just strategies to help you when it comes to adding integers. Once again, if you have a negative and a positive number, I subtract, and I use the larger absolute values sign to know if I have a negative or positive sign. If I have a negative and a negative, I add, and I use a negative sign. If I have a positive and positive, I add, and it's a positive number.